Have you ever wondered how legends die? Not the legends from mythology books, but those who once walked among us, breathed the same air, felt the same scorching desert sun. Legends made of flesh, bone, and, in the case of today's protagonist, a whole lot of courage. Or was it recklessness? We're in 1881. The American Wild West is changing. The days of famous outlaws and gunslingers are coming to an end. And one of the most notorious figures of this era is about to meet his fate in a small town called Fort Sumner in the New Mexico Territory. William H. Bonney, Billy the Kid, a young man of only 21 who already carried a reputation bigger than many men could build in several lifetimes. They say he killed 21 men, one for each year of his short life. The truth? Probably between 4 and 9. But who cares about numbers when the legend is so much more fascinating? But how did he really die? What is the truth behind the end of Billy the Kid? What really happened on that hot July night? Who was there? And why, more than 140 years later, do so many questions still remain? Today we're going to reconstruct, step by step, the final moments of one of the most famous outlaws in American history. Get ready for a journey into the past, where bullets were real and justice was often just a distant concept. Our starting point is a war. Not just any war, but the Lincoln County War. A conflict that divided that region of New Mexico between 1878 and 1881. On one side, the powerful business group known as the House, led by James Dolan. On the other, the English rancher John Tunstall and his lawyer Alexander McSween. Billy fought for Tunstall's side until Tunstall was killed in February 1878. Tunstall's death changed Billy. The young cowboy, who until then had only minor crimes on his record, swore vengeance. Together with other men loyal to Tunstall, he formed a group known as the Regulators, a kind of militia that sought justice in its own way. It was during this period that Billy built his reputation as a gunman. He took part in shootouts, escaped from jails, and became one of the most wanted men in the territory. And who was determined to capture him? None other than Pat Garrett, a former friend who now served as sheriff of Lincoln County. Garrett and Billy knew each other well. Some say they had even worked together as buffalo hunters. Others claim they frequented the same saloons and played cards together. But fate placed them on opposite sides of the law, and that same fate would bring them together one last time in July 1881. But let's take a step back. In December 1880, after a long pursuit, Garrett finally captured Billy at Stinking Springs, near Fort Sumner. The young outlaw was taken to trial in Mesilla, charged with the murder of Sheriff William Brady during the Lincoln County War. The verdict? Guilty. The sentence? Hanging, scheduled for May 13, 1881. Billy was transferred to the county jail in Lincoln, where he was to await his execution. But fate, or rather, Billy's cunning, had other plans. On April 28, 1881, something extraordinary happened. Billy managed to slip out of his shackles, grabbed a gun hidden in the jail's outhouse, some say it was deliberately placed there by an accomplice, and killed the two guards watching him, James Bell and Bob Ollinger. Bell was shot when he tried to block the escape. Ollinger, who was eating lunch across the street, heard the shots and ran toward the jail, only to be met by Billy on the balcony, holding Ollinger's very own shotgun. "Hello, Bob," Billy is said to have remarked before firing, sending Ollinger to the other world. After the escape, Billy rode toward Fort Sumner, a place he knew well and where he had friends. He spent the next few months hiding out, moving between local ranches and visiting his girlfriend, Paulita Maxwell. Pat Garrett knew Billy would eventually return to Fort Sumner. It was just a matter of time. And in July 1881, he got the tip he was waiting for. Now we reach the crucial moment. The night of July 14th, 1881. A hot, stifling night, like so many others in the New Mexico summer. Fort Sumner slept under a starry sky, except for a few souls wandering the dusty streets. Pat Garrett and two deputies, John Poe and Thomas Kip McKinney, arrived quietly in town. They had been told Billy was visiting his friend Pete Maxwell, Paulita's brother, at his ranch. The three men approached the house cautiously. Garrett knew the place well. He decided to go in alone to speak with Pete Maxwell, while his deputies kept watch outside. What happened next would become one of the most debated scenes in the history of the American West. Here begins the mystery. According to Garrett's official account, he entered Pete Maxwell's darkened bedroom and sat at the edge of the bed to speak with him. At that very moment, by coincidence, Billy was also heading toward Maxwell's room. Billy, barefoot and wearing only pants and a shirt, is said to have walked in carrying a revolver in one hand and a butcher knife in the other. Seeing a shadow in the darkness, Billy allegedly asked in Spanish, "¿Quién es? ¿Quién es? Who is it? Who is it?" Garrett, recognizing Billy's voice, drew his gun and fired twice into the figure. One shot struck Billy in the chest, just above the heart. The young outlaw fell backward, never uttering another word. Billy the Kid, the terror of New Mexico, was dead. He was only 21 years old. But was that really how it happened? Some witnesses and historians question this version. Let's explore the contradictions and mysteries surrounding his death. First, there's the question of timing. How did Billy and Garrett arrive at Pete Maxwell's room at exactly the same time? Was it an extraordinary coincidence, or was there something more? Delavina Maxwell, a servant of the Maxwell family who considered Billy as a son, offered a different version. According to her, Billy was sleeping in another room of the house when Garrett arrived. Pete Maxwell allegedly told the sheriff where Billy was, and Garrett then ambushed the young man while he slept. Another theory suggests that Billy was lured into a trap by Paulita Maxwell, his girlfriend, acting under Garrett's instructions. Some historians point out that Paulita was pregnant with Billy's child at the time, which adds an extra layer of drama and tragedy to the story. There is also the account of an old Mexican man named Saval, who claimed to have seen Billy and Garrett conversing amicably hours before the shooting. According to this version, the two planned Billy's death together, allowing the outlaw to escape to Mexico while Garrett collected the reward. And here we enter even more controversial territory. There are those who believe Billy the Kid never died that night, that the person killed by Garrett was someone else, and that the real William Bonney escaped and lived a long life under false identities. A man named Brushy Bill Roberts appeared in New Mexico in 1949, at the age of 90, claiming to be the real Billy the Kid. Roberts had detailed knowledge about Billy's life and even scars that matched the outlaw's known wounds. He insisted that Garrett had killed a friend of his named Billy Barlow that night, and that the real kid had fled. Another claimant was John Miller, who lived in Arizona and confessed on his deathbed in 1937 to being Billy the Kid. Miller also had impressive knowledge of Billy's life and bore bullet scars consistent with the kid's recorded injuries. So, what is the truth? To understand better, we need to look at the physical evidence and the testimonies of those present. Billy's body was laid out at the Maxwell home and buried in Fort Sumner's cemetery the day after his death. No formal autopsy was conducted, which already raises suspicions. Several people in Fort Sumner saw the body and confirmed it was Billy, including close friends like Charlie Boder. However, the burial was quick, especially considering the summer heat in New Mexico. Some sources suggest that the body was already in advanced decomposition by the next morning, which seems strange given the short time since his death. Pat Garrett soon wrote a book about his hunt and Billy's death, titled The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid. The book, published in 1882, was widely criticized for inaccuracies and exaggerations, which didn't help to establish a definitive version of events. Something many don't know is that Billy the Kid was a charismatic and well-educated young man, fluent in Spanish, and beloved by many Hispanic families in the region. This is not the portrait of the ruthless killer the press of the time painted. An interesting theory involves Governor Lew Wallace, who had promised Billy a pardon in exchange for his testimony in a murder case. Billy kept his part of the deal, but Wallace never granted the promised pardon. Some believe that Wallace, feeling guilty, may have secretly arranged Billy's escape with Garrett's help. There is also a mysterious letter, allegedly written by Garrett to a friend years later, where he hinted that not everything is as it seems regarding Billy's death. The authenticity of this letter, however, has never been proven. To complicate matters further, Billy's original grave was destroyed in a flood in 1904. A new marker was placed in 1931, but there is no certainty it marks the exact location of the original burial. In 2003, officials from Lincoln County and Tobacco County, where Fort Sumner is now located, attempted to exhume Billy's remains and those of his mother, Catherine Antrim, to perform DNA tests and finally solve the mystery. However, legal and ethical issues prevented the exhumations. Another intriguing detail: the day after Billy's death, a Las Vegas, New Mexico newspaper published a detailed account of the incident. How did they get so much information so quickly, in a time without telephones or telegraphs in the region? Now let's analyze the people who claim to have been present on the night of the death. Pete Maxwell, in whose room the shooting occurred, gave few interviews about the incident. In one of them, he stated that he was asleep when Garrett entered his room and woke up to the sound of gunfire. This contradicts Garrett's version, which claims he spoke with Maxwell before Billy arrived. John Poe, one of the deputies who accompanied Garrett, wrote in his memoirs decades later that he and McKinney saw a figure, presumably Billy, approaching the house, but couldn't clearly identify him in the darkness. According to Poe, they tried to stop the man who ran into the house. This also does not align perfectly with Garrett's account. Celestino Padilla, a local resident, claimed to have seen Billy playing cards in a nearby saloon at the very moment he was supposedly killed. Severo Gallegos, another resident, said he had seen Billy and Garrett talking amicably hours before the shooting. One of the most fascinating theories involves the possible financial motivation behind Billy's death. Governor Wallace had placed a $500 reward for Billy's capture, dead or alive. For the time, it was a considerable sum. Garrett, who was not a wealthy man, could have been tempted by the reward. Some go further and suggest that Garrett might have been paid by powerful ranchers in the region to eliminate Billy, who knew too much about the behind-the-scenes of the Lincoln County War. The young outlaw represented a threat to many influential men, who feared he might reveal their secrets. There is also the matter of the weapons. According to the official account, Billy was carrying a revolver and a knife when he entered the room. But why would he be armed that way when visiting a close friend in the middle of the night? And why would he be barefoot? Another intriguing contradiction lies in Paulita Maxwell's account. She claimed she was sleeping when she heard the shots and ran to see what had happened. Upon arriving at her brother's room, she saw Billy lying on the floor, still alive, groaning in pain. According to her, Billy did not die instantly, as Garrett claimed. And then there is the matter of the body. Billy was buried wearing the clothes he had on when he was killed, without a proper coffin. No photograph of the body was taken, which was unusual for the death of such a notorious outlaw. Some suspect this was done deliberately to prevent anyone from realizing that the dead man was not actually Billy. One of the most curious points is Garrett's behavior after the incident. He quickly left Fort Sumner without waiting for the funeral. He also did not immediately claim the reward, which seems odd for someone supposedly motivated by money. We must also consider the broader historical context. 1881 marked the end of an era in the American West. The frontier was closing, railroads were connecting the country, and law and order were being established in formerly wild territories. Figures like Billy the Kid represented a kind of freedom and rebelliousness that was disappearing. Billy's death, whether real or staged, serves as a symbolic marker of that transition. The last great outlaw of the West falls, and with him, an entire way of life. Perhaps that is why so many people want to believe he escaped, that he managed to live to see the 20th century, that the legend never really died that hot July night. And here we reach a crucial point in our investigation. What really happened to Billy the Kid's body? In 1931, Charles W. Four, a businessman from Fort Sumner, decided to capitalize on Billy's fame. He fenced off what he believed was the burial site of Billy and two of his companions, Charlie Boder and Tom O'Fouliard, and began charging admission to tourists. But there was a problem. No one was exactly sure where Billy was buried. The cemetery had been damaged by floods, and the original markers had disappeared. Four simply chose a spot that seemed plausible. In 1950, a larger headstone was placed on Billy's supposed grave, inscribed Billy the Kid, followed by his real name, William H. Bonney, and the dates 1859-1881, though many historians believe he was born in 1859 or 1860. The headstone was stolen in 1981 on the centennial of Billy's death, but recovered days later in Granbury, Texas, coincidentally the town where Brushy Bill Roberts, one of the men who claimed to be Billy the Kid, spent his last years. In 2004, Lincoln County Sheriff Tom Sullivan and Capitan, New Mexico Mayor Steve Setterwall, tried to exhume the body in the Fort Sumner Cemetery to perform DNA tests. They also wanted to compare the DNA with blood on a floorboard from the old Lincoln jail, where they believed Billy had bled after killing guard Bell during his escape. However, they faced strong legal opposition. The state of New Mexico opposed the exhumation, and the Maxwell family, who still own the cemetery, also refused permission. In 2010, the then governor of New Mexico, Bill Richardson, considered granting Billy the Kid a posthumous pardon based on Governor Wallace's unfulfilled promise. After months of public debate and historical investigation, Richardson decided not to grant the pardon, stating that the evidence was insufficient. Another fascinating element in Billy the Kid's legend is the photographs. Only one authenticated photo of Billy exists, a tintype taken in 1880 in Fort Sumner. In it, we see a thin young man with soft features, wearing cowboy clothes and holding a Winchester rifle. He does not look like the ruthless killer described by the newspapers. In 2015, a second photograph was discovered, supposedly showing Billy and several members of his gang playing croquet. Forensic experts analyzed the image, and many believe it is authentic, though controversy persists. What these images show us is a Billy very different from the monster described by the press. We see an almost ordinary young man, perhaps a bit arrogant in his pose, but far from the bloodthirsty demon of the headlines. The truth about Billy the Kid's death will probably never be known with absolute certainty. The evidence is contradictory, the witness accounts inconsistent, and many of those who might have known the truth took their secrets to the grave. But perhaps that doesn't really matter. Billy the Kid transcended his physical existence to become a symbol, an American legend that captures the imagination of every new generation. He represents rebellion, youth, the refusal to bow to authority, the fight against perceived injustices. For some, he was a cruel bandit who deserved his fate. For others, a folk hero, victim of powerful political and economic interests. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere between these extremes. What we know for sure is that on the night of July 14, 1881 in Fort Sumner, something happened that would forever change the history of the American West. Shots were fired in the darkness, a man fell, and a legend was born, or perhaps only began its transformation. Pat Garrett, the man who killed Billy the Kid, or not, met an equally controversial end. In 1908, he was murdered on a deserted road near Las Cruces, New Mexico. The killer was identified as Wayne Brazel, a rancher with whom Garrett had land disputes. Brazel was tried and acquitted, claiming self-defense. Many, however, suspect he was merely a pawn in a larger plot. As for the men who claimed to be Billy the Kid in later years, Brushy Bill Roberts died in 1950, just weeks after his pardon request was denied by the governor of New Mexico. John Miller was buried in Arizona under a headstone identifying him as William H. Bonney, alias Billy the Kid. In Fort Sumner today, the grave attributed to Billy the Kid remains a tourist attraction. Surrounded by an iron fence to prevent further thefts, it is visited annually by thousands of people fascinated by the legend of the young outlaw. New Mexico has embraced Billy as part of its cultural heritage. Festivals, museums, and even an opera have been created in his honor. Billy has become a cultural product, a brand, nearly as recognizable as figures like Jesse James or Wyatt Earp. In 2021, 140 years after his supposed death, the legend of Billy the Kid is still alive and well. Films, books, and documentaries continue to explore his life and death, each offering new theories and interpretations. And perhaps that is the true magic of Billy the Kid. No matter how many times his story is told, there is still enough mystery, enough contradictions, to keep the fascination alive. Like all great legends, he now exists in a space between history and myth, between documented reality and collective imagination. And so we reach the end of our journey into the past, our reconstruction of the final moments of one of the most fascinating figures of the American Old West. What really happened that night of July 14, 1881? Did Pat Garrett truly kill Billy the Kid in a dark room in Fort Sumner? Or was it all an elaborate staging, allowing the young outlaw to escape to a new life in anonymity? Each of us must decide which version of the story we prefer to believe. But one thing is certain: as long as we keep telling the story of Billy the Kid, questioning the official versions, exploring the contradictions and mysteries, he will never truly be dead. Like all great legends, Billy the Kid continues to live through the stories we tell about him. And perhaps that is the greatest feat of all for a young man who lived only 21 years, nearly a century and a half ago. And you, what do you think really happened to Billy the Kid? Did he die that night in Fort Sumner? Or did he manage to cheat death and fate once again? History is full of unresolved mysteries, and this is just one of them. If you enjoyed this trip into the past, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more historical reconstructions like this one. Leave in the comments which other figure or historical event you would like to see explored with this same level of detail and mystery. History is full of secrets waiting to be revealed, and together we can continue this fascinating journey of discoveries. Until the next historical mystery.